So welcome everybody to our webinar this week. We'll be looking at optimizing your e-learning strategy. So big picture webinar this one. And with my name's Ramona Yin and I head up eWorks content development team here at Vetassess. And joining me, we have three panelists that are going to basically give us different lenses on establishing your e-learning strategy and the sort of things to think about when doing that. So first up, we have Chris Laverdure, we have Jessie Harrison, and we have Chris Dunkley. In a moment, I'll give it over to them to introduce themselves, but I do want to thank them all for making the time today, and especially to Chris and Chris, because they're both a little bit unwell, but have still pulled up and come in today. And Jessie's recovering. So thanks to everyone for joining us, and thank you to the panel. I might give it over to Chris just to do a brief introduction to himself.
Thanks, Ramona. So my name's Chris. I'm the LMS lead customer support at eWorks. My job, and as well as the team, is to provide the support to our eWorks LMS clients, providing that ongoing support, training requests, and helping them to maximize their LMS to the best of their usage.
Thanks, Ramona. Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. I'm Jessie Harrison. I'm the corporate courseware lead here at eWorks. Sometimes we could be called the content team. I head up an internal team of instructional designers, and that means we take our clients' learning needs and requirements and turn that into hopefully engaging content for their learners. We mostly deal with bespoke, custom kind of things for corporate sides of business. Thank you.
Last but not least, Chris Dunkley.
Thanks, Ramona. So I'm Chris as well. So I'm Chris D. That's Chris L. So I'm the technology implementation lead. So that means that my team kind of works on the building kind of content that Jessie's team would write, and basically making things interactive. So that's my main role. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Just while we're getting the next slide up, I would recommend that people join in to chat any ideas around some of the questions that we're going to answer. And if you've got your own questions, to submit them in the chat as well. Really try to connect with each other and share your ideas. This is a bit of a community of practice webinar, but we will definitely try to answer all the questions that you have by the end of this webinar. The webinar should take about 45 minutes. We're going to allow plenty of time at the end for about maybe 10 to 15 minutes for any questions that we might have. So please, as you have questions, just put them in the chat, and I'll try to get to them throughout the webinar or at the end. Okay, so I guess when thinking about your strategy, the first thing you need to think about is what is your approach, what is the right approach for your particular business and your particular learners. So having a think about your demographics, and then there's obviously other considerations to be made. In terms of those other considerations, I might throw it over to the panel to give us a little bit of an outline of what sort of things they consider from their different areas and roles when considering the right approach. Chris, I might hand it over to you.
Thanks, Ramona. Yeah, I'm happy to jump in first. So I guess from my perspective in today's webinar, I'll be talking more about the LMS, so a learning management system, where you can basically have your resources and allow your students to be able to engage with each other and with their trainers, and also, submit assessments and all the like. So when I mentioned LMS, we're talking about the learning management systems. So I guess choosing the right approach from my perspective, we would look at it, I guess, in the bigger picture, thinking about the organisation doing a needs analysis with all their stakeholders and thinking about what do they want to use the LMS for. Think about ways to maximise your investment and get value for money. As you start thinking about what the LMS can do, yes, you've got the critical part of students accessing it, but other areas of the business might be able to utilize it too, thinking about inductions and the like too. So thinking about where that can be utilized and trying to maximize the opportunities there. Some other things to think about is, if you do currently have an LMS, does it meet your needs? Realigning and checking what it does, and if there's anything missing or any gaps in the requirements. And along those lines, if you are looking at adding an LMS to your organization, just a couple of questions to have a think about is think about the capabilities that you want it to have, need, must, desired, those kind of things. Are there any integrations that you would like to have within it? So you can think about your student management system, your SMS, your human resources system, your HR. Do you want them to be able to talk to each other? To streamline some of that manual work that would happen between transferring the data across. Reporting requirements, you might have ASQA requirements that you need to meet or internal requirements on that. Think about if you're getting your content created internally in the LMS or elsewhere. And those are the things that I'm sure Chris and Jesse will talk about later as well. But also think about the manual tasks that are done and how that can be automized, how that can be streamlined to make the lives of everyone in the business a bit easier. And the last thing I'd probably bring up is thinking about accessibility. So is the LMS going to be accessible to all the needs of all the users that will be on your system?
Thank you.
I might jump in here after that. Thanks, Chris. So again, like I was saying, I'm going to approach this in the context of our team, the corporate content team. And approach to us is more about learning approach, I think. Learning approach is how we want the users or the learners to engage with the content. It's important to find the right one. When you do, you maximize that potential for learning and you produce that really great, engaging, impactful learning experience. So planning stage is crucial. As Chris mentioned, needs analysis, you really need that kind of requirements gathering phase. We like to collaborate with the clients, and if there's any subject matter experts available, those two, as much as we can during this initial planning phase. We sort of grab all these stakeholders and we hold workshops, brainstorming sessions, all those kind of activities will help define those really important project aspects early on. At these sessions, you want to uncover and identify those key takeaways. That the takeaways the clients they want their learners to have from the experience. You may find an approach becomes pretty apparent at that stage. For example, if we're undertaking some kind of corporate training module, some kind of compliance thing, you might want to show consequences of making certain decisions in relation to some kind of professional situation. This example I think would be best served by a scenario-based approach. Then you can sort of play out that situation and perhaps even provide like a branching pathway kind of situation where the learner can sort of see their choices play out across the scenario. All in all, crucial to identify all this early. Thank you.
Well, yeah, thanks, Jesse. I guess picking up from where Jesse's left off, as he's mentioned, it's really important that we kind of define all your requirements up front and have some meetings. So like this is an opportunity for us to kind of gather a lot of your requirements and draw out any kind of additional elements that might be priorities for the project. So some important questions you might want to be asking yourselves at that phase is like how do your learners access the content? Are they on phones? Are they on desktop? Are they do they want to be able to kind of save the content and read it on the go? Think about what kinds of interactivity you're going to serve for learners. Do you need like videos or gamified elements? Are there going to be lots of diagrams and motion graphics? So as Chris mentioned earlier, another question to ask is about accessibility and ease of use considerations. So part of that is like the demographics of the learners and how that's going to affect their level of comfort with technology. So once we've kind of established these kind of basic core requirements for the project, we kind of get into the more specific stuff. So from the perspective of my team, a big one of those is probably like what tools that you use to develop. So we're quite comfortable using any existing tools that you're already using. That's something we do. We can work within your existing tools or within your existing environments to develop content. So we've used a wide variety of things over my time at eWorks. But if you don't have a kind of existing e-learning approach, we can also start from scratch and provide more guidance about an approach that we feel matches the requirements of the project, and have like a range of solutions for different pricing levels and budgets. Yeah, so we can also help with development into your LMS, as Chris was talking about, and assist with that type of setup. So thank you.
Thanks for that. So just in summary, it's important to kind of keep these factors at the back of our mind as we work through the rest of the webinar. Things like any reporting requirements, how are you going to track learner progress, how you're going to create that lifelong learning journey for them, and where is that recorded might be part of your bigger learning strategy. Some of your content or learner user experience requirements, how quick do you want them to be able to go through the modules? How engaging do you need the content to be? How much knowledge they already come with, and how you're going to present some of those new learnings might be another consideration. And any tools that the learners might already have access to or have used and are familiar with, and what new tools you might need to have to kind of advance or enhance some of that content and that experience, other considerations as part of your bigger strategy. Karen has mentioned things like the audience, which is part of that needs analysis. You would be doing the diversity of those learners, some of their needs, and how accessibility would need to be considered as part of that strategy. And some of the examples she's provided is contemporary scenarios for role plays and assessments. And obviously that's a big consideration. If you are going to use scenarios or case studies, how are you going to build them into the learning? And so that might inform the greater strategy, especially if you've got multiple programs or courses and you want a consistent approach across the different portfolios or different qualifications or courses that you might have. So based on that, it gets, I guess, to the next point of looking at your content in a little bit more detail once you've had a bit of a consideration about how that platform is going to play out. Is looking at existing content you have or existing information you might have, and how you want to tailor that to actually start developing it into learning content. So I might give it over to the panel to explain how they go about in tailoring learning content for their particular learners.
Yeah. So I might continue. Yeah, so over the time I've been at eWorks, it's actually, I would say it's one of our big strengths. It's how we kind of tailor our approach to the needs of different projects and clients. So we do that at all levels of our projects, but the others will be able to speak more to their areas. But in terms of build focused elements, a lot of the time we kind of develop a totally different approach for each project. So this might be using a different tool, set up custom navigation for the module and interface elements, custom activities. So there's a couple of reasons why we do that, and we often end up doing that. So one is that to ensure that we're always following the client's branding requirements, and that it's going to kind of sit naturally when in its final landing place. Another one is to make sure that we're responding to the needs of the learners in terms of their level of comfort with technology, and make sure that the navigation they're seeing is kind of, again, matches what the other parts of the navigation that they might be seeing outside the learning content. And then the third probably main reason is to fit the needs of the instructional design. So I'm always personally trying to find new approaches to streamline the interface so it doesn't get in the way of the learner, and just find better ways to lay out content so that it can be understood more clearly. So another big way that we tailor our content to the needs of the client is through, as I mentioned, activities and content. We're always looking for areas where we can present things more dynamically. We'll talk a bit more about activities later on in the presentation, but obviously activities and interactivity helps diversify the content, which keeps learners engaged and assists with different types of learners and that kind of thing. So we also go through multiple rounds of internal quality assurance and client testing, so that makes sure that the work is definitely responding to the needs of the project, and that the client feels like it's responding to their learners' needs and to their personal needs. So thanks.
Jesse?
Yeah, thank you. I'll jump in after that. Thanks, Chris. Look, I agree. I think identifying specific learner needs and tailoring the content is one of our biggest strengths here. As mentioned in the corporate team, we are dealing with almost exclusively bespoke custom content from organizations. So tailoring is really important. There's an organizational context there that we often need to carry through to those materials. Examples, situations, maybe there's some kind of internal assessment that needs to happen, some kind of credential. Maybe we're wanting to socialize, internal processes better by making that into content, making that more engaging. It's certainly more engaging to do a learning module than to sit through a 100-page PDF of all text and maybe an image or two here and there. That's kind of the strength here. That's why you want to tailor this content, bring it into more of a learning module situation. You need to consider your audience and their needs. Adopt that learning-centered approach. Audiences do have unique characteristics, and those are the things that you can tailor that content for. I can think of an example quickly of learners that, they're busy, they're time poor. It's busy time for the business, so it's busy time for them. If they need to do some kind of internal training, there's ways of tailoring the content to make that easy for them. So two strategies I can think of immediately would be creating a learning experience that sort of has efficiency in mind. You're stripping out all the stuff that they don't need to know, just giving them what they do, give them that relevant learning experience that values that lack of time that they have. Another version of that could be structuring that content to be more a series of really compact, self-contained topics. The learner can just tackle that one by one over a longer period of time, and that allows for them to interact with that content in that little time that they have. And when they do, it's information that's kind of complete and self-contained. I think it's just really valuable to give them a choice like that. That's what tailoring really, that's the benefit of tailoring that content. Thanks.
All right, I guess I'll jump in after. I think, Jesse and Chris have pretty much done a really good job at explaining this one quite well in terms of tailoring content when we're looking at an LMS. Probably not too much to cover, but I'll go through a few little bits. Ramona had a very good point, and that's probably my first one I wanted to bring up, is in terms of the budget. What's the investment of the organization in terms of creating this content that you want to add into the system? Is it going to be bespoke, or is it going to be generic resources that you're planning to use? Things like first aid training can be generic, whereas if it's something within the organization, that's probably going to be more something that needs to be created and customized, and that's where Jesse and Chris come in. But I think the key parts from an LMS side, and thinking about how our clients essentially tailor their content. Every client uses their LMS in a very, very different way and very specialized into what they are delivering. So I think the key, and I think someone mentioned this in the chat, is thinking about your learners, thinking about their preferences and what you're aiming to deliver, and putting that into the context of your LMS and thinking about how can you deliver that? How can you meet those needs? So thinking about the course formats, the way it's designed, the layouts, the activities that you can use, whether you're using forums and chats for engagement, which I think we'll talk about a little bit later. The length of the course is another one. If it's a micro-learning course, it's going to be shorter. If it's a certificate or a diploma, you've obviously got a lot more resources you're going to include into the course content there. But whether you have an LMS or you need an LMS, I think the key as well is thinking about, can you customize it yourself, or do you always have to rely on a third party to do that too? Do you have your own internal staff that can be able to make that fluent in instructional design, or is that something that you prefer to outsource to people who could be able to do it much easier for you? So I guess probably some of the key considerations on my part.
Thank you. So some excellent points there about streamlining for consistency and accessibility, considering some of the activities, the length of those activities, and I guess the purpose, retention, recall, ultimately that, mimicking the tactile experience, but online. And then also giving some consideration to the context of that learning and what it might need, whether it's in context of the industry or the organisation or specific skills that you're developing for the learners. We don't have anything in the chat for this specifically, but I do want to just respond to Sam's comment about our views on AI for content generation or curation. We will talk about that a little bit at the end. But if people want to just pop into the chat any AI tools that they are using when creating content or anything really to do with e-learning, and we can kind of bring the focus of that big question in terms of our views on AI a little bit more specific based on what the people in the room are actually doing with AI. So with that in mind, we've had a look at the requirements of our learning environment, looking at our learning content, and now it's that part where we connect those two and think about how we integrate learning content most effectively with our tools and platforms. So again, over to the panel, if you could give us some insight into how you integrate learning content effectively.
I might jump in here. Thanks, Ramona. Yeah, I don't think I have a whole lot to say on this one, but because I generally think of integration, I guess, in the context of our team to be, the the action of building out that content with our educational tools or deployment into an LMS. So I mean, that's something I think the others can get into that, give the nuts and bolts. That said, I don't think, that doesn't mean IDs aren't part of that process. We're very active during that start of the project with the content design. So we need to make sure that the content we are designing takes advantage of those features and the tools and all those kind of benefits afforded to us when we use educational tools and LMSs and that in-house experience that we have. I think we're pretty lucky to have a tech team and an LMS team that can take our developed learning content and take it into those next stages. I guess if we're quickly talking strategy, I could recommend just include those in-house teams if you have tech teams and LMS teams to bring them in early to the content development process. It helps out, especially if the project has those really unique learner requirements. Those unique things will impact the work, and it will impact that integration aspect too. So getting everyone on board early is just really good practice. Also, just briefly, I'd suggest that to any IDs out there, just make sure you have a good working understanding of what tools and platforms and the general workflows that exist in your team. Like bonus points if you can use some of those tools, because that means you can make sure that content you develop does make use of all that expertise available. If you don't think about it, it's pretty good professional development to start. So yeah, think about it.
Thank you. Chris?
Thanks, Chelsea. Yeah, yeah, from my perspective, working on builds, at least me personally, it's an area I'm kind of really interested in, how we kind of present and integrate the content, kind of maximum effectiveness, I guess. Yeah, so I think this is an area that you can really improve the overall experience by making small changes. And it doesn't have maybe the most obvious kind of effect or whatever, but all changes kind of add up to make a kind of big difference, I think. So our team have a lot of years of experience putting courses together for people, and you get quite used to how to take content and break it down into multiple pages or screens and pass out the information so that it doesn't become overwhelming, and how to break it down with using activities and motion graphics and video to break up the experience as well and assist visual learners. Yeah, but a lot of the details we add into our modules, I think, are kind of held mostly invisible in the final product if they're being done properly. So, it's not something that's visible, but it just contributes to the overall feeling that the module's working well, and it presented professionally, and it's easy to use, those types of feelings. And then, I think this is quite important because if the module doesn't feel professional, it undermines the kind of experience of using the module and how easy it is to use, but it also it kind of leads to people getting confused or like, not understanding how to complete an activity or something like that. So yeah, it undermines all those kind of elements related to the build, but it also undermines the content itself, and that can cause big issues. So yeah, that's it for that.
Thank you. And Chris, Al?
Thank you. Yeah, definitely agree with what Chris and Jesse have said. From an LMS perspective, I think the key here is the content compatibility. So making sure that all the content you're planning to use or incorporate is going to work seamlessly within your learning management system. And that's probably one of the benefits of a system like Moodle, and I'm sure most of the other ones out there do it too, is you can bring content from anywhere. So you can bring SCORM. So if you're using Articulate or Captivate to create content, you can easily load that into your LMS. If you got your videos, so like YouTube or Vimeo, you can easily embed that into your courses. So users aren't having to jump over to that website to watch the video and come back. Embedding it makes it also easier, and you're not going to be utilizing storage on your LMS too, which is something to be careful of. You can also use tools like H5P. For those not aware of what H5P is, that's a free plugin tool in Moodle that gives you the ability to add some interactivity. And so you could take that YouTube video that you have and turn it into an interactive video, which basically means you can start adding questions or prompting the users as they're watching the video, which is a good key way to ensure that they're engaged, especially if it's a long video, that they're engaged and following through, instead of just turning the video on and then going to go make a cup of coffee in the kitchen. A couple of other things you can look at is resources. So if you have PDFs, documents that you want to add in, making sure that that can be easily viewed, and just thinking overall what can be done within the system to ensure that smooth ease of operation by the end user.
Fantastic. So again, accessibility seems to be a running theme when you're considering both your strategy, the content, and integrating the content with any platforms or tools that you might be using. Another consideration is the compatibility of the resources or the learning resources that you have with the tools and systems that you're using or hosting these tools and resources on. Another one is thinking about space and storage and how this might affect viewing or downloading, uploading documents or other learning resources. We've got a good chat happening on the side about people, how they're using AI. I encourage you to keep adding to that, and we can get back to it in terms of a discussion at the end. Moving on to the next question that I'd like to ask the panel is, having looked at content and our platform is now thinking about how we create a learning environment, an interactive learning environment. As we know, adult learners or any learner needs to have some sort of interaction, some sort of engagement with the content. So how do we create that online?
I'll jump in first this time. So in a learning management system, there's quite a lot of different activities that you can employ to be able to give you that interactivity. The first one being the H5P tool, which is free in a Moodle LMS. So you can create interactive videos that I said before, but you can also do things like a crossword, flashcards, drag and drops, and the like. You got other activities you can employ, like forums and chats, to keep the users engaged with each other and also with their teacher or trainer. There are additional plugins that you can incorporate, such that will allow gamification, as an example. So one example one that we've looked at before is Level Up, essentially making that almost a competition between the users on the course. So as they complete the activities, they get points and then they're ranked. So it's almost like a race between each other to see who can be number one and who can score the most points by completing the activities in the course. You can also obviously increase the interactivity by embedding your videos and SCORM content, as we've mentioned before. We're starting to talk about AI in the chat, so that's a good way to look at this too. Still in its infancy, but there are a lot of tools that are coming out that can help you, this interactivity. Teacher-matic is a really good one that we've seen recently, where you can use that to create content such as quizzes and other activities and embed that into Moodle as an example via an LTI connection, so you can have them talk into each other. There's a couple of other plugins that have recently come in, and one's called AI text to questions. So you can basically put in a subject and it will be able to create and generate questions based off that topic. So that's something else along the lines of AI that are coming through. But I guess in terms of really creating that strong interactive component, that's generally where your authoring tools can come in. So things like Articulate and Captivate. And I think that's probably where like Jesse and Chris can give their opinions on a bit more.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, so obviously throughout the whole presentation, been kind of talking a lot about interactivity, and it's a core part of my role in the development. Yeah, so yeah, there are some topics that are kind of always engaging and don't necessarily need to be bolstered by interactivity, but most of the time, when we're talking about e-learning modules, you know, they're covering kind of educational content, sometimes compliance focused topics, and in cases like that, the interactions really help. They're basically essential, I think, at this point. So yeah, they also kind of help, as we've been talking about, they help support different kinds of learners. So some people prefer to really just read flat, just, you know, give me the information, I'll read through it or whatever. But a lot of other people will take in a lot more by watching a video, or by others still might prefer to complete some activities, and that helps them kind of take in the information better. So yeah, so to go into a little bit more detail about the types of interactions that we use in the content that we build, obviously we utilize the standard kind of interaction types that are tried and true, like click reveals and drag and drop activities, and sorting activities and quizzes. Yeah, but with a little bit more planning from the kind of outset when we're first setting up the project, we can create much more like detailed and meaningful interactivity that can have a bit more impact on the learner and on the kind of engagement level of the course itself. So this would include things like scenarios that kind of allow multiple paths. So you kind of picking and choosing your own progress through the content, and it's kind of adjusting to the needs of the person that's doing it. We can also implement like simulations of real world scenes, like, or scenarios that people can work through. You can also do the same for like applications, like software applications, so that people can kind of step through how to learn a specific application that they're trying to learn. Another big one is reflective journals, where we kind of gather information from the learner as they're going through the module, and then at the end they can kind of print it out, and it kind of comes into a nice report for them that might have some key takeaways and that kind of thing in it. Gamified elements is another kind of element that's been popular recently, where, you know, you might want to have a system where people can earn points or receive rewards as they kind of achieve things throughout the module. And these are all things that can kind of help like draw people through, or make things a bit more engaging. Yeah, so these are the types of things we try to bring to the module where possible, usually. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Yeah, look, I feel like I'm going to tread some familiar ground here, especially with everyone's responses in my last one, perhaps. But I think I can expand on some things that ITs should be looking for when we want to, you know, to incorporate into their development strategy. We're talking about interactive learning environments. I think it's helpful to find, for my team at least, to interactive as being maybe the act of engaging materials, as in like you interact with it. I know interactives also mean, you know, on-screen multimedia activities, that kind of thing. So I guess to us, the interactive learning environment is, you know, a learning experience that incorporates elements of like really active participation with the material. And that's achieved in a few ways. A lot of it's been mentioned previously. we've got those interactive elements, the multimedia stuff, gamified elements, just nowadays expected. I think it's like a baseline to have that stuff. You've really got to be doing that and more in these kind of modern experiences now. Including collaboration aspects into the materials, group activities, discussion boards, that kind of thing. Assessment components, especially ones that include feedback, including feedback points throughout the materials, with knowledge checks, quizzes, the reflective journal, as Chris D was talking about, another great example. Leveraging those really great branching narrative scenarios and simulations, another great way to introduce those interaction points with the content. The bonus is they're quite immersive as well, which gives you additional benefits, as well. We're already starting to see lots of virtual reality kind of creep in to the industry, which is great. I think we should keep that going. To sum up, it's crucial to develop a learning environment that leads to like greater engagement. It improves retention, and it also gives you this kind of personalized, tailored experience almost. Because you're getting feedback and you're getting interactive content that is really relevant and useful. Thanks.
Thank you. One thing I did want to add to that, as we speak to more and more clients, the interpretation of interactive is broadening to mean adaptive. So as I'm engaging with learning, how does it keep up with the pace of my learning, whether it gets quicker, whether it gets a little harder, whether it maintains the pace without having to do that manually. So thinking about how does your environment, how does that e-learning journey for that user maintain that pace and motivation for continuing the learning is an important consideration to make. Thank you to the panel for those questions. Have we got another slide? Yep. So I guess this brings us to the last kind of consideration for your strategy is how you will measure or how you will evaluate the success of that particular strategy and your ongoing strategy, and considering what changes, if any, you need to make. So again, I'll throw it over to the panel if they can give us some ideas about how they go about measuring that success.
I might jump in here first. Look, in my team, we measure success by learner and client satisfaction. That can be difficult to measure sometimes exactly. It's based on the quality of the content and how well the learners have engaged with it. Have the learners retain that knowledge? Can they then apply that knowledge going forward? Those kind of things. Client satisfaction is tied to learner satisfaction, of course, but we feel that it can also be how well we form that working relationship with the client during the course of the project, and how they feel that their outcomes have been met. Hopefully very well. That's what we go for. So how will we do that? Well, we try and set ourselves up, for success by, at the start. We make sure our initial planning, for the project's on point. That's the stage where we define those project needs, and the best way to do that is to collaborate with the client as much as you can. We try and involve them in the process at as many stages as we can. That gets you on the same page, and when you're on that same page early enough, you can avoid things like scope creep. You can avoid things like those evolving requirements. It's those ones where you need to unexpectedly pivot later on because we didn't think of something, or there's a question you didn't ask, or something that can derail. Brought up much later in the project. Let's get all that stuff out in the open early. I'm sure we've all been there on those kind of projects. We can't eliminate this entirely, sure, but we can minimize it as much as we can. So as mentioned, workshops, sessions with the stakeholders, get the SMEs involved, drill down those requirements. The earlier you get to defining all those really specific, really unique requirements for the project, the better. Create documentation that can help you track all that, help you capture it all. It can be used to inform the project, inform all the staff, give them the direction. It can also be used with the client to set expectations, define terms, get that common understanding of the project at the right time. All seems like common sense, but yeah, earlier the better, of course. One good strategy, real quick, prototyping I think is really valuable. If you know what a prototype is, it's like a slice of the overall project. It's just enough to demonstrate, how you're tackling those requirements, and give everyone a sense of the direction that the project's heading. Really beneficial for the client to see something and hopefully use it if it's along that far. Then you can test it, you can validate it, you can show it to a specific group and get feedback. And if it's received well, that's great. You can move forward, confidently. But if it's not, well, then that's also great, because now you've identified where some pain points are, and you can keep iterating until everyone's happy. And this is hopefully you've done this early on in the project, so you've got plenty of time to go back and get it right, and then move along and not have to worry about some of these stuff popping up later on.
Just before we go to the next person, sorry,
Yeah.
I've just got a question that's aligned to what Jesse was talking about.
Oh,
because
sure.
the question is about how to measure the quality of the experience when you don't have access to the learners. So in a classroom, you get direct feedback, you're engaging with the learners, you can kind of see whether they're following or not and where they might need help based on their questions. But very similarly to what we're doing when we develop a bespoke product, we hand it over to a client or to a group, and then we don't actually engage with the learners. The question is, how do we then measure that experience or the success of that product? So I'm handing it over to probably the whole team, but perhaps with Jesse, how we might measure that. Any ideas?
Yeah, it's difficult when you don't have too much access to the learner at the time. You don't often see that until the end of a project, and maybe you don't hear it all. Look, the client knows their audience, especially if you've got people in stakeholders involved in the project, like SMEs, subject matter experts, who have been in industries, have been the kind of learners that you are targeting. Their feedback and their expertise is valuable. It can get you really close to what a learner might, the kind of feedback a learner might get. Hopefully there's some kind of pilot going on as well. Perhaps that's something you can leverage. Like there's a focus group of students or learners that can be a little test group and provide some feedback early. Yeah, difficult, I would say. Yeah.
So probably just on the back of what Jesse's saying, the prototypes and pilots are probably your best form, where you've actually tested it with maybe not the specific learner group that it is going to use that, but with another similar group, just to see how that experience is panning out. Something else that you may be able to do is actually request data from the LMS. So you might be seeing how many people have commenced a module, how many may have completed. Sometimes it'll track it right down to time spent on particular tasks, how long documents have been open, how quickly particular questions have been answered from the time of an activity commencing. So if you can see how quickly things are being completed, how often they're being completed, how many people are completing them, that may give you an indication of, is it too simple? Is it too complicated? Maybe it lacks some of that engagement or interactivity where people are registering with some interest and then basically losing that interest as they work through the modules. It might be that the descriptors for the modules or the learning outcomes aren't appropriate, so people are starting with some motivation for that particular learning and then finding that it's actually not what they wanted and then losing the motivation to continue. And how far into the learning experience that happens may give you an indication of how that might be experienced or felt about. So they're probably simpler tools, but yeah, if you don't have access to the learner specifically, other than the reports and feedback, it's really going to be hard to engage on that feedback. I'd be interested to see if other people have other opinions or have evaluated in other ways and that they want to share with the group. Please add that in the chat. We did have another follow-up question in terms of how we create engagement and interactivity when dealing with long documents, especially in courses where learners need to understand and work with government documents or websites, and they need to navigate long pieces of information or data. So especially in the construction where there's standards. A lot of the WHS rely on topics where you have to go to maybe WorkSafe and read particular legislation or, requirements and so forth. Has the panel got any ideas about how we can make them or simplify them or make them a little bit more interesting or more engaging through interactivity?
Jesse, or do you want me to go into that?
Oh, you go first. I'll go after.
Okay. Yeah, so anyway, obviously a big part of that is the kind of instructional design process that might kind of help break it down. But yeah, even just from my perspective, working on builds, like there's definitely ways you can kind of break down content. So we've been kind of talking about it, but there might be kind of activities that you can replace chunks of the content. So that it's at least a break from like read a bit of text and then do an activity where you're kind of placing information into context instead of having to kind of read. So it probably depends specifically on how important it is that people kind of read the documents, because I've definitely worked for certain clients where like they have very stringent requirements that their people have to read it. Say if it's in the medical industry or something, it's like, no, this is the exact wording they have to read. You are not allowed to make it interactive and that kind of thing, because they have to take it in a certain format. So yeah, in those you just kind of like try and present it like piecemeal or whatever, so that the people can take it in. Yeah. Do anyone else want to expand on that, or
I might just, Chris, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I'll just pretty much add on to that. I think, yeah, definitely we would, thinking about the LMS side, would kind of think about if you could chunk that kind of data into different sections. In Moodle, as an example, you could use an activity called a book. So you can put that over several pages and just share bits of data in each, and then within those data you can start adding some activities, so it could be a quiz, maybe just a little quiz in between as you go through. It could be an accordion, so like you can just click on the heading and then it'll show up with the information. You could add in flip charts or dialogue cards where you can flip around the information. So depending on the content and what the resources is, in some cases, as Chris mentioned, you can't change it completely. But if you got some freedom there are ways to kind of work around with that flexibility with different activities.
Yeah, I think another way you might be looking at that is how you present that information. So on the website, it might be chunked in paragraphs and just heavy text. Is thinking about, can it be presented in a diagram and an infograph? Can this be parts of it be changed into an animation cartoon or a small video to explain certain elements? And then thinking about that adaptive type learning, are there parts where we can ask about or assess up front and see what the learner actually needs to know, and then that will take them to different parts of the program where basically they can gap train the rest of it. So I think it goes back to what Christine was saying up the front, is that important piece of planning and instructional design, and considering that experience before we start writing content. And on the back of that, we have got another question. I'm just conscious of time. We do have another question which talks about learners abroad or international students. And it says, how do you capture the cultural and contextual information relevant to a group of learners besides the discussions with the organisation that hires you to create these products? So basically, how do we identify a learner demographics or learner needs without just being told by the client what these might be? How are some other ways that we might be able to find out what those cultural or contextual requirements are?
I feel like I can answer this one. We've done a project just recently about call centers in Indonesia. The client was actually pretty impressed with our ability to reference local sort of concepts in that course, if I recall. I know our IDs on that one did a lot of research. They came up with these content pieces that did use that local context. They referenced places. We made sure like our color scheme was culturally appropriate. it was just a big sort of research piece that we went on. We of course confirmed, things with the clients. They validated a lot of this stuff as well, but I wouldn't say they had a lot of input into that as well. So it was up to us essentially to sort of tackle that and make sure it was culturally appropriate.
Yeah. So just on that example where eWorks had to do a module about outsourcing a call center as part of a business strategy for Indonesia. Part of that was actually reading some of what their history might have been, some of the information about existing cultural trends, because that kind of drew what the atmosphere, or if you like, what the vibe, energy might be in Indonesia exactly. At the moment. Looking at some of the newspaper articles, understanding what's important right now and what's in the media right now that people can relate to and reflect on. Thinking about some of those folklore stories that people might be familiar with, and saying, okay, how can we draw on those and replicate them in some of our activities, and some of those learner games, you would be aware of as a child that you could still use as a learning activity in your content, so that there's something that attaches or connects the learner to the content. Creates that safe learning space before we pivot on new learnings or start scaffolding more complex, ideas. Did anyone from their panel have anything else to add to those? And again, I'd love to hear from educators that are online about how they do go about contextualizing some of that learning when you don't actually have a lot or a big brief from a client about who your learners might be or the demographics of those particular learners. Just while people are writing that, we did have a question about how do you negotiate time with a client, and I think anybody that's in this space, there's no golden rule. I think you need to really understand the processes involved in writing or developing or building the content at hand, and understanding the content outcomes and being realistic about what you can and can't do, and then negotiating backwards if you need. Usually the clients need less time because training's about to launch. Starting to think about what is it that we can take out, what's the nice to haves and what are the must haves, and then build a timeline around the must haves, and then maybe adding the nice to haves as additional resources or additional reading or even additional modules after these particular learning that is needed at hand. But I think I'd probably be speaking to everybody, for everybody when I say that negotiation, there's no golden rule. Well, we certainly haven't got a golden rule, but I'd be interested to know if the panel have any golden rules around negotiating relevant timelines for particular projects. Yeah.
No golden rule. Yeah. Good planning. I mean, you plan the best you can. That gets you can get close.
Yeah, I think experience will drive a lot of that, where you know that this particular piece, whatever that learning design might look like, will take this long, and then starting to say, okay, what can we add and what can we take away to still keep the effectiveness, but take away some of that time. And a lot of it will come down to understanding the content and really being able to divide it between nice to have and must have, and then being realistic about the quality that you're going to produce based on the timeframes that you're given, and being able to really discuss that with the client, that, shorter time usually means lower quality if there's a lot of work to be done. So how do we still maintain the quality and effectiveness of that learning, but still within shorter timeframes? Vivian, I hope that was your question. If it wasn't, just rephrase it in the chat, and I'll try to address it a little bit better, or feel free to reach out to us and we can have a conversation offline. There is a question, it might be for Chris L, where Kim's asking, is there an option through LMS to click onto content and give the learner a choice as to how they might view it? So whether it's infographic, text, gamification, or am I dreaming? So is there a way, and this might be even for Chris Steve through our technology implementation team, is there a way of having the same text or same content, I should say, be viewed in different ways based on choice? Is AI that advanced? Is something we can do with that? Are we in magic?
Not that I can think of. Like, you could probably do it creatively by adding some buttons and then linking them to a different area. But I don't know if there's anything specific that I'm aware of. There could be. There's hundreds and hundreds of plugins in Moodle, and no one has the time to see every single one. So it could exist, and I just haven't seen it, but not off the top of my head from my side, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I know of one example recently. Articulate, they're just now adding a tool where it's similar to other large language model type AI tools where you can put your content in, and then it'll rewrite it a little bit, but the main thing it will do is like put it into activities, so it'll make suggestions of how to structure the information. But I haven't had a chance to play with that. They're just kind of marketing it right now of like, oh, we're playing around with this idea or whatever. Yeah, so I don't think that's necessarily exactly what Karen was talking. Was it Karen that was asking?
Yeah.
Was talking in terms of being able to choose how you want to view the information and have it automatically recontextualize it. But yeah, that was more just like an upfront contextualization during the development process. So yeah.
I hope we do get that kind of functionality soon.
Yeah.
It might help address some sort of instructional design pain points as well. I mean, I was just rereading some of those questions, and the one we had about the long content, government documents, websites, long pieces of data. Look, if we get to a requirement stage and one of the requirements is that it has to stay as is, that content's locked in, then the ability to let the learner experience that content how they want, whether it be some kind of video, whether it be some kind of just audio stream, whether it's transcripts that ticks over like a teleprompter, I don't know, whatever it might be, that offsets the probably dry, long nature of the whole thing. Great, let's go, bring it.
Yeah. So I guess that brings us to Sam's question about our views on AI. I think I might speak for the panel. We're all excited about it, but obviously understand that there are limitations and there are challenges and obviously risks with using AI. But as people have pointed out, there are effective uses for it, and there's definitely a place for it in education. Some of the people with us today that are in higher ed, your institution, and you may even be part of that response to TEXA where you're writing about your strategy using AI and how you're mitigating some of those risks and maximising its use. So some people have already started thinking about that, but I think overall there's definitely a place for it in content generation and curation, and some of those examples speak to that, and some of those questions actually speak to the need for it. But I think there needs to be also consideration as to how to best use that and safely to use that, I guess. I think that brings us to time. So if you have still questions for the panel or for myself, please feel free to send them through to that generic email address. And then that if you put the name of the person you want to engage with, our team will send your emails and your comments through to the relevant person, and they can connect with you, either respond to your email, or if you want a quick chat, we're more than happy to have a quick chat about some of the needs you might have. I hope this session has been helpful in helping you put together a strategy, or at least start thinking about things that you might need to consider. And as always, we're always available to help you establish those strategies if you do need some support. We do have a survey that we would like the participants to just do if you've got time. It gives us a little bit of feedback about what you liked, what you didn't like, and allows us to contextualize some of the webinars coming up and make them more suitable, more engaging for you. So please go ahead. That's in the chat now. Chris has just sent it through. If you could just click on that and fill it out. It's very short. It shouldn't take more than 5 minutes. But it does help us create better content and better webinars for you. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to the panel for some of those great insights. We hope to catch you again in the next webinar, which is up in June, and Jessie, I think, is leading that one. So there'll be more information coming out about our next webinar, should you wish to join us then. Thank you so much for joining us today. Enjoy your night.
Thanks, Ramona. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Cheers.
Bye.